We tend to view the history of science as a linear path to progress, a succession of brilliant insights born of pure intellect and a selfless pursuit of truth. We imagine scientists in white coats bent over microscopes, or philosophers lost in deep contemplation. This is a convenient myth, a beautiful fairy tale. But the true history of progress is chaos, pain, mistakes, and at times, the basest human passions. Sometimes, the greatest breakthroughs emerge from entirely unexpected, even repugnant motives. London, the early 18th century. A city where medicine was still the domain not of scholars, but rather of butchers, where saving a life was more often a miracle than a result of skill. It was here in this brutal world that surgeon Claudius Amyand forever etched his name into the annals of medicine. He was a royal surgeon, respected but far from the most renowned. His name would have faded into obscurity if not for one day. He did what no one had done before him. He performed the world's first successful operation to remove an inflamed appendix, a procedure that today saves millions of lives annually. He became the unwitting father of abdominal surgery, a pioneer whose achievement, however, was long forgotten. Yet this happened not out of duty, not from humanity, nor for the triumph of science. This operation was an act of retribution, pure concentrated vengeance forged in the secret chambers of London mansions. It was vengeance that paved the way for saving lives, even though it was conceived merely as a blow against an enemy. We will delve into this story, a story of how one of medicine's most common and vital operations was born, not in sterile laboratories, but in a boiling cauldron of human malice and resentment. This is not just a tale of surgery, it is a dissection of the very nature of scientific progress. Pain was ubiquitous. Death, a frequent visitor. In the early 18th century, disease was perceived as punishment, not as a physiological disorder. The human body remained an enigma, its inner workings unexplored territory. Physicians, if they could even be called that, relied on ancient works, on dogmas that were a millennium and a half old. Bloodletting, emetics, and purgatives were the universal answers to any ailment. Ignorance was the norm, and every operation a death sentence. Surgery was the domain not of scholars, but of artisans, barbers, butchers, and military surgeons. They worked quickly, brutally, without anesthesia. Sterility? No one had heard of it. Open wounds were cauterized with hot irons or doused with boiling oil. This was barbarism, sanctified by centuries of practice. Pus flowing from a wound was considered laudable, a sign of cleansing. No one understood that it was a sure path to infection, agony, and the grave. Every cut, every bruise could turn into a fatal infection. Any internal injury, any abdominal pain, meant a death sentence. Opening the abdominal cavity was unthinkable, a certain death. Millions of people died from diseases that today seem trivial. It was in this world, where medicine was more the art of inflicting pain than of healing, that a breakthrough was destined to occur. His name was Claudius Amyand. He was not from a noble family, nor did he belong to the elite whose fathers had for centuries held honorary seats in the Royal College of Physicians. He was a Frenchman, a Huguenot, who had fled religious persecution in his homeland. He arrived in England, a country that offered him refuge but forced him to constantly prove his right to a place in the sun. This was a man accustomed to struggle. He began his career in one of London's grimmest places, Chelsea Hospital. This was not merely a medical institution but more an asylum for veterans, where death was a frequent guest and suffering a daily routine. Young Amyand saw it all, festering wounds that doctors cauterized with hot irons, not understanding that they were multiplying pain and not stopping infection. He saw patients dying from the simplest injuries, from fevers, from any scratch that turned into a death sentence. He observed the masters of their craft, barbers and butchers, who wielded scalpels and saws without the slightest understanding of anatomy. They cut, burned, amputated, and always with the same result, either instant agony or a slow, agonizing death from sepsis. Amyand saw laudable pus flowing from wounds and understood that it was not cleansing but a harbinger of doom. He saw how doctors, relying on the works of Galen and Hippocrates, which were a millennium and a half old, repeated the same mistakes, killing patients in the name of tradition. Every day at Chelsea Hospital was a lesson for Claudius Amyand, a lesson not in how to heal, but in how not to heal. He saw the failure of the entire system. He saw how ignorance, sanctified by centuries, killed thousands. This was an experience that burned into him a deep distrust of authorities, dogmas, and proven methods, which were in reality lethal barbarism. He didn't simply resign himself to this chaos. He sought a way out. He sought answers. And this made him dangerous to the old world, a man who was ready to break any rule to find the right path. The day came when all available remedies proved powerless. Claudius Amyand stood by the bed of a 10-year-old boy suffering from excruciating pain. An abscess, a festering sore, had formed in his groin, unresponsive to ointments, poultices, or even the strongest painkillers. The boy had once swallowed a pin, and it, having passed through his intestine, somehow ended up in his groin area, causing this deadly inflammation. Traditional medicine had given up. The boy withered away daily. It was then that Amyand made a decision that seemed insane: to open the abdominal cavity, to penetrate inside the body where, according to most physicians, an invisible deadly force reigned. This was a step into the unknown, a direct challenge to all dogmas, all proven methods that had killed patients for centuries. But Amyand saw no other way. He was not interested in dogmas. He was interested in life. And perhaps he saw in this act something more than salvation. Perhaps it was his way to strike a blow against those who had scorned him for years, who clung to dead traditions. In the dim candlelight, under the watchful eyes of a few assistants, Amyand made the first incision. A sharp scalpel incised the skin, then the muscles. He worked quickly, decisively. He found the pin and extracted it. Then, exploring the affected area, he stumbled upon something completely unexpected: a small, inflamed, blood-engorged appendage. The appendix. At that time, little was known of its function, and its inflammation was considered incurable. To leave it meant condemning the boy to a slow death from spreading infection. Amyand faced a choice: to act as any other surgeon of that era would have, leave the dangerous appendage, close the wound, and pray, or risk everything, break the last, most dreadful taboo, remove an organ from the abdominal cavity. He chose the latter. His hands moved with incredible precision. He carefully ligated the base of the appendix. Then, with a single movement of the scalpel, he severed the inflamed organ. No one before him had done anything like it. No one had dared. He cleaned the wound. Carefully, layer by layer, he stitched the abdomen closed. It was a moment of absolute silence and tension. The boy not only survived, he made a full recovery. His wound healed. He was free of pain. It was unthinkable. Not just a successful operation, but the first successful appendectomy in history. Proof: the human body was not forbidden territory. Proof: courage, backed by observation, could overcome centuries of ignorance. And proof: sometimes progress is born from the most unexpected, most personal motives. But how did Amyand achieve this? In a world where every cut was a risk and internal surgery meant suicide, his success seemed a miracle. But there was no miracle. There was a system, an iron logic, forged by years of observation and a rejection of dogmas. His genius lay not in mystical revelation, but in extreme attention to detail. At Chelsea Hospital, he saw not just dying patients, but living, constantly evolving textbooks of anatomy and physiology. He didn't read ancient treatises to understand disease. He observed it. He studied the consequences of every traditional method, how pus, which the masters considered laudable, actually killed by spreading infection, how cauterization with a hot iron did not stop the spread of disease, but only multiplied suffering and shock. Every failure of old medicine, every agony he witnessed, became for him a cruel yet invaluable lesson. He took nothing on faith. His only authority was his own eyes and hands, only what he saw with his own eyes, only what was confirmed by the result, a living patient, not a dead dogma. Amyand understood. Knowledge gained at such a cost should not die within the walls of a single operating room. His duty was to record, to disseminate. He didn't just perform operations, he described them, scrupulously, with unprecedented detail for that era. His reports had no room for vague discussions about humors, only facts, what he incised, what he saw, what he removed, how he stitched. He published his discoveries not only in Latin, the language of the scholarly elite, inaccessible to most, but also in his native French. This was not just a translation, it was a challenge, a message to those who scorned him as a foreigner, who clung to outdated traditions. He wanted his works to be accessible, so that others could learn, so that life-costing mistakes would not be repeated. To this end, he not only wrote but also refined his instruments. Standard scalpels and saws were too crude, too imprecise for his tasks. He demanded microscopic precision. Perhaps he even designed new, finer instruments capable of penetrating deeper, making cleaner incisions, minimizing damage to internal organs. Every detail, from the sharpness of the blade to the curve of the forceps, mattered in his pursuit of perfection. His approach was radical, not just to heal, but to learn from disease, to learn from the body, to learn from death itself. Every unsuccessful case he saw around him, every patient who died from ignorance or adherence to outdated dogmas, did not break him, but only strengthened his resolve to find a different working path. He discarded everything that didn't work, without regret, and he built his practice on what yielded results, even if that result was achieved against all sacred rules and authorities. He was not afraid to make mistakes himself, but even less afraid to acknowledge the errors of a system that killed thousands. This is what made him a pioneer, not a genius born from above, but a man who forged his genius in the crucible of observation and ruthless self-criticism. Amyand was not just a surgeon, he was an engineer of the body, a designer of new medicine, built on the foundation of experience, not dogma. His scalpel was not just a tool, it was an instrument of knowledge, capable of cracking the code of the human organism, a key to its secrets. And his story is proof. Sometimes, to ignite progress, one needs not only genius, but also the fearlessness of a person ready to go against the whole world, driven not only by the pursuit of truth, but also by deeply personal motives. Success, however, did not bring Amyand universal recognition. On the contrary, his breakthrough provoked not admiration, but furious rejection. The London medical world, entrenched behind the walls of the Royal College of Physicians, saw in him not a pioneer, but a dangerous transgressor, a man who dared to infringe upon immutable foundations. They called him a dilettante, an ignoramus. He was a foreigner, a Huguenot, and his methods were, in their opinion, barbarism. He cuts the living, accusations rang out. He violates the sacred boundaries of the body. For these doctors, raised on the dogmas of Hippocrates and Galen, any operation inside the abdominal cavity was considered a death sentence, a forbidden act. They cited ancient treatises, centuries of experience which, as we know, was merely a succession of fatal errors. Amyand, with his scalpel, his empirical approach, destroyed their comfortable world. He was a threat to their authority, their reputation, their centuries-old monopoly on knowledge. Attempts to discredit him began immediately. His works, written in French and Latin, could be ignored, ridiculed. But the boy who survived the appendectomy was living proof, and such proofs grew in number. Every patient Amyand saved was a blow to the authority of the old guard. They tried to ban his practice. They used their influence to blacken his name in the eyes of the nobility, at court. They spread rumors of his incompetence, of his recklessness. But it was here, in this confrontation, that Amyand's patrons stood by him. Not those who clung to ancient texts, but those who valued results. Claudius Amyand was a royal surgeon, and influential figures stood behind him, members of the royal family, aristocrats whom he might have already saved, or whose loved ones he had healed. They saw his methods work. His patients not only survived, they recovered. These were people whose lives depended on real skills, not academic disputes. They gave him protection. His position at court, his connections with influential families, became a shield against the attacks of conservatives. This was not just a conflict between two physicians. It was a clash of two worlds, the world of dead dogmas, where knowledge was passed from book to book, and the world of living practice, where every operation was an experiment and every patient a teacher. The medical establishment, accustomed to its power and infallibility, could not accept that a breakthrough came from a foreigner, from a man who dared to think and act differently. They could not forgive him his successes. But thanks to his patrons, Amyand continued to work. He continued to operate. He continued to prove. Every successful case was another nail in the coffin of old medicine. He didn't just heal, he paved the way. And his path was paved not with dogmas, but with lives saved. But the resistance did not fade. The old guard clung to every chance. They awaited Amyand's failure, and this opportunity arose, not in a courtroom, but in the chamber of one of the kingdom's most powerful men. The Lord Chamberlain, a man whose influence extended from court to parliament, suffered from an ailment that nullified all efforts of traditional physicians. His abdomen was distended. Pain gave him no rest. The medical establishment declared the case hopeless. This was the ultimate challenge to Amyand, the last chance for the old world to prove itself right, or lose forever. The Lord Chamberlain was dying. His family, in desperation, turned to the royal surgeon. Amyand arrived at the mansion where despair reigned. He examined the patient. The diagnosis was precise: internal inflammation. There was no other way, only the scalpel. The risk was enormous, but he did not hesitate. He knew what he was doing. In the dim light, under the nervous gazes of the court physicians, Amyand once again achieved the impossible. He opened the abdominal cavity. His hands moved with precision. He located the focus of infection, cleaned it, removed it, stitched it closed. It was a demonstration, a public lesson. The days of waiting were agonizing. But then, something incredible happened. The Lord Chamberlain began to recover. Slowly but surely he returned to life. Within weeks he was out of danger. He lived. It was a triumph for new medicine, a triumph for Amyand. For the Royal College of Physicians, this was a devastating blow. They could not deny the obvious. A living, recovered Lord Chamberlain was more eloquent than 1,000 treatises. Their dogmas, their centuries-old rules, their authority, all crumbled under the weight of one undeniable fact. They were forced to acknowledge him, tacitly, grudgingly, but acknowledge him nonetheless. Their attempts to discredit him, to ban his practice, now looked pathetic. Claudius Amyand became indispensable. His name was spoken with reverence in the highest circles. Patients flocked to him. His status changed. From a foreigner who dared to transgress against the sacred, he transformed into the only one who could save. He became a new authority, an authority forged not in academic disputes, but in the crucible of real victories over death. This was the moment when the old world of medicine finally yielded, giving way to a new era where results were valued above tradition. After the Lord Chamberlain's triumph, the medical world of London found itself in an untenable position. Their centuries-old dogmas collapsed under the weight of one undeniable fact. The man they had condemned to death had survived. He was saved by the very method they called barbarism. This did not lead to an instant revolution. The Royal College of Physicians offered no public apologies. But the crucial thing changed, the very possibility. Before Amyand, opening the abdominal cavity was considered a sure path to the grave. Afterward, it became a path to salvation. His meticulous descriptions of operations, precise drawings of internal organs, and wound care protocols, published in French and Latin, became an unofficial yet highly effective textbook. Surgeons, who previously indiscriminately cauterized wounds, now studied his methods. They saw, Amyand understood what he was doing. His successes with the boy and the Lord Chamberlain showed internal organs were not forbidden territory. They were merely unexplored. And now, the first guide had emerged. Overall survival statistics in the city did not skyrocket overnight. Anesthesia was non-existent, and infection remained a scourge. But the chance of survival for internal pains, previously zero, now became tangible. Physicians, who previously only shook their heads, could now, in theory, offer an effective solution. Institutionally, the Royal College of Physicians, though not openly acknowledging him, could not ignore his existence. Their monopoly on true knowledge was broken. His patients lived. This was the most powerful proof. Gradually, very slowly, an understanding began to spread in medical circles. Results were more important than tradition. Empirical experience outweighed ancient dogmas. From then on, the path to scientific progress in medicine lay not through the library, but through the operating room. This was a beginning that forever altered its course. Claudius Amyand. His name, which had faded into the shadows of history for many decades, today resonates as a symbol. A symbol that the greatest breakthroughs are not always born from a pure pursuit of truth or academic research. Sometimes they are forged in the crucible of personal battle, from resentment, from revenge. The first successful appendectomy, which saved millions of lives, was a consequence not of humanism, but of a cruel blow to his enemies. This is the paradox of his legacy. But therein lies the true lesson for humanity. Progress is not a myth of white-coated geniuses walking a linear path. It is a living, unpredictable process. It is driven not only by reason, but by the most earthly passions. It breaks through centuries of ignorance, through pain, against dogmas. And only the result, a living patient, not a dead treatise, can point humanity toward the right path. Amyand's story is a dissection of the very